The cognitive connection linking biology with social status did not appear until the crystallization of the idea of race in the 18th century.
Connecting people's physical features with high and low statuses didn't become a reality until the idea of race was pulled down from the realm of imagination and crystallized or made into a physical reality in the 1700s. And so race is a relatively new idea which was created strictly for the purpose of colonizing the minds of all the people, right? And distorting their perception of reality to make them feel either superior or as inferior people. And so this act and intention of the colonizers would be in some circles today classified as black magic. And so all the European colonizers, they used the idea of race in their conquests, but there was one group called the English who used it way more effective than anyone else, as we'll see as we continue reading in the book Race in North America by Dr. Audrey Smedley.
Exclusiveness, however, is fundamental to the ideology of race, and it could only be maintained by the erection of sociocultural boundaries between populations that, 1, become broad barriers against interaction between races.
Exclusiveness can only be maintained if these groups that were created to be racist are prevented from interacting amongst each other. And this was done by the colonizers with the use of the law.
2, preclude any possibility of egalitarian relationships.
They have to make sure that the different racial groups have no equal relationships. And again, they use the law to ensure this by giving certain groups access to basic rights while stripping these same basic rights away from the other groups.
And 3, do not recognize or provide for intermediate realities. The Spanish brought with them to the New World many of the cultural values and features of the Inquisition era and grafted them onto the societies created in the colonial setting.
The Spanish brought their culture and values with them, and they created agents out of those people in the lands that they went to conquer. And so let's find out some of the cultural values that they transplanted into the people's minds.
Among these were the idea of castas, the belief that the purity of one's Hispanic genealogy entitled one to a higher social status.
The Hispanic genealogy she's referring to is one from Spain. And so the purest people with the Spanish blood, they were to be looked at as superior and of a higher social status, which means that the indigenous people, they were to be viewed by others and by themselves as being people on a lower social status, right? And so this type of thinking, it has real physical consequences.
The fear of mixed or tainted lineage.
No mixing because they didn't want to lower their status or their children's status.
The judicial codes, customs, and proceedings of the Inquisition, religious fervor and intolerance.
Strong passion for Jesus and clinging on to every word that the Bible says, no matter how crazy it sounds. And so this is religious fervor or being a zealot, right? And this is how they taught those indigenous peoples to be, to the point where the Bible believers in the Spanish territories are today almost as bad as the blacks here in America when it comes to being unreasonable and unthinking on the subjects dealing with religion. And so they got it from the Spanish folks. I'm talking about the people, the indigenous folks in the Spanish territories. And also the intolerance of other people's beliefs, that's coming from the Spanish thought as well. And this is something that we talked about in part 8, where Spain became intolerant of other people's beliefs and they started kicking everyone out of the country.
And most of all, the customs, practices, and traditions of medieval slavery.
They brought this over here with them too, because they were coming over here not to make friends and sing Kumbaya. They were coming over here to conquer, right? They were los conquistadores, right? The conquerors.
Some of the Spanish customs and habits of thought were no doubt picked up by the English.
The lords of domination, also known as the English, they picked up some of these ideas from the Spanish, as we have already seen in other videos from other series. But the English, when they get wind of strategies of domination, they always have to find a way to level it up, right? They have to surpass that which they have learned from other people, right? And which they did.
Thus, some of the major ingredients for the ideology and worldview of race were present in the thought and practice of both the Spanish and English peoples during the critical period when European colonial settlements in the New World were established.
What was one of these major ingredients? Viewing people as savage who had a vastly different culture from that of the English, right? Because as we know, the Irish, they were the first savages in the eyes of the English. And the English had been trying to dominate and transform the Irish for some time. And this is before they had even ventured over into the New World.
All of the European conquerors and colonizers turned to the use of the term race. Raza, race, riasa.
Because it was a useful tool to do what? colonize and conquer. And again, that's what they came to those lands to do, right? They didn't come up with the racial categories because it sounded cool and that it was something that everybody wanted, right? They created those categories for the purpose of making it easy to know who was to be dominated, right? And many people, they find this very hard to comprehend because they think that this is how the world has always been, but that's not true. You've been dominated.
They all shared a common belief that those whom they conquered were in some sense savages, despite the recognized diversity among the indigenous cultures and the different conceptions of savagery among the Europeans.
Everyone they came to conquer in the Americas was converted into a savage, right? It didn't matter how kind and how gentle they were, or how friendly and how funny they were. They were savages in the eyes of the colonizers who came not to make friends, but to colonize.
And all of the Europeans engaged in the practice of slavery, both with Indians and imported Africans.
All of the Europeans put their subjects in chains, both physically and mentally.
Yet the degree to which they conceptualized and institutionalized the perceived differences varied, as we shall see later, for reasons that relate to their own cultural histories, experiences, and demographic realities. The English took the term race and molded it into a phenomenon unlike that of their competitors, structuring closed and exclusive groups out of the melange of peoples of the Americas.
The English took the idea of race to the highest level. And what we have to understand is that race in the Spanish colony has some form of flexibility, right? They have a saying over there that goes, money whitens, right? And so the more education and the more money a person has, regardless of the skin color, they can move up in the social rankings, right? But the English, they left no room whatsoever, right? They created a reality where a person who has rich skin was to be looked at as a black person, right? And permanently at the bottom, right? Down in the pit, right? And this is no matter how educated or how much money a person has. And the English even went to the extent to transform themselves into white people, right? Who were supposed to symbolize everything that was opposite of a black person, right? Which is superiority and a status of being on the top, right? And the English, they were so good at doing what they did that they still have people to this day locked up in a daze, right? Just like a character on Mortal Kombat when they've been beaten up and beaten down so bad that their body starts wobbling, right? That's how the English have people in America hundreds of years later, right? And so you have to get from under that spell in order to climb on that ladder and to raise yourself out of the pit and to enter into the free world where life is much better and it makes more sense. And so my name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.